AD 70 would be sold into slavery and scattered among the nations. But in the latter days, God promises to bring them back to the mountains of Israel, which had been desolate. Up until recently, the mountains of Israel were just a dust bowl. When Mark Twain, the famous American author, who was several generations before this one, visited Palestine, as it was known back then, he said it's just a dust bowl. And that's what it's saying here. They were brought out of the nations, now all of them dwell safely. So in the last days, God says he's going to bring his people, the Jews, out of all the nations where they're being held in captivity, the European nations, the North American nations, all across the world. God says in the last days he's going to bring them out of the nations back into the land of Israel to fulfill his covenant and to fulfill his purpose. And he's doing such now. This officially accelerated in 1948 with the official rebuilding and the announcement of Israel as a nation again. 1948. And that occurred a number of years after the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And through the permission of the United Nations, they were allowed to sail with ships into Israel, and the refugees from the Holocaust and other nations were allowed to settle in Israel in relative safety. Now, let's read what happens. Now, let's remember that Adolf Hitler and his peoples, back as far back as 1929, developed and made close alliances with the Muslim nations. So Nazism and the teachings of the Third Reich were cultivated in the Muslim nations, and you will see the leaders of the Muslim nations very much involved in Nazism, the Aryans, the Nazi race. So, for example, when I went to speak in the nation of Malaysia before 9/11, the head of Malaysia was a devout Muslim. I landed in the airport. There were gigantic signs hanging in the airport which said, if you have drugs or something else, the penalty is death. It was a pretty sobering thing. It wasn't like you go to court or get a fine. Basically, they were saying we were going to kill you. And the ladies who checked you in were wearing burqas, and it was a serious Muslim theocracy. Now, I spoke at a number of large conventions, but I was not allowed to speak to Muslims. They spoke to Hindus and Buddhists. The driver of the car that would drive me to the conferences in Kuala Lumpur was a Muslim, and I was told if I witnessed to him that I could be arrested or killed. So I didn't do that. Now, we read what God has in mind. And thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Gog, Russia, the prince of Rush, Meshach, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. So God makes it very clear that this desire to invade Israel in the last days is a God-ordained idea, because he is going to put hooks into the jaws of these nations, and he, God Almighty, is going to drag them down into Israel to invade them in the last days. So God gives them the idea, and God draws them down for his purposes. And then it tells us who these people are. Persia, which is Iran. Iran has a nuclear weapons program. Iran is in the Suez Canal with nuclear warships, and when you see these mighty Iranian Navy vessels, these are enormous naval ships, and they look like they're sailing through itsy bitsy tiny lakes that are crevices in the sand dunes. And it's quite remarkable. And then U.S. ships, also with nuclear missiles, are headed towards the Suez Canal.